Hey there. Are you one of those people that likes to plan things out? You know, set yourself goals in work and life. Own your own business by 30, your first home by 35, maybe that sleek leather jacket by 40, that sort of thing. Now imagine doing that on a macro level for 1.4 billion people. That's what China's Communist Party leaders do. Every 5 years, they come up with a plan that spells out what they want the country to achieve. The next one is currently in the works, and the stakes couldn't be higher, with China's economic growth slowing and trade tensions deepening with the United States. So we thought we'd dig in and look at Beijing's 5-year plan and what it means for China and the global economy. I'm Carmel Crimmins, and this is Reuters Econ World. Every week we go deep on the economic principles and ideas driving the biggest news around the world. This week's show, 5-year plans. Centralized economic planning started out in the Soviet Union under Stalin. It's largely seen as a relic of a bygone era, except in China, where 5-year planning is still very much a thing. It's a way for Chinese leader Xi Jinping to signal what direction he wants the country to go in, and where the state will invest and intervene. It's a key messaging tool for an economy driven by state-led industrial policy, and the policies it sets in motion can reshape the global economy. But it all happens behind closed doors, so to try and understand the process and what to expect, I spoke to our Greater China Bureau Chief, Kevin Krolicki. Hey, Kevin.
Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you. So 5-year planning, Kevin. Do you have a 5-year plan yourself? Do you remember that? Do you remember that question you used to get in interviews back in the day? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Do you have one for yourself?
I struggle to keep a 40-minute plan together.
I hear you.
But China has a 5-year plan.
They do. They do. I mean, you know, when we talk about these 5-year plans, right, like just to kind of set the stage, it's about boosting economic growth, right? It's about through centralized goals. That's kind of what we're talking about here. But it is a throwback, isn't it, Kevin? Like it originated with Joseph Stalin and kind of Soviet-style command planning. But Russia kind of quietly dropped the whole 5-year plan when the Soviet Union collapsed, but not so Beijing.
That's right. I mean, it's a system that has evolved over time.
Yeah.
You know, in preparing for this discussion, I was looking at some social science research on the 5-year plan. What is it? Yeah. And as you say, in some ways, you know, in the modern economy, it seems like a bit of an anachronism.
Yeah.
One way that social scientists suggest thinking about it is that, you know, China's government is really, in some ways, akin to a very large corporation. And setting goals and making sure that those goals, setting goals at the top leadership, and then making sure that those goals are understood, are tracked, is itself a pretty formidable undertaking. I mean, if you consider that China has something like 29 ministries, 300 plus prefectural level governments, 45,000 local governments, and this whole state within the state employs 10 million people, you know, telling them what they need to be working towards is itself a big undertaking in a system like this.
And they have evolved, right? Like the 5-year plans. Like in the early years in the 1950s, they were much more prescriptive with production quotas, like for things like grain and steel. And then there was the Great Leap Forward, that 5-year plan under Mao Zedong, which was meant to transform China into an industrial economy, but it instead killed millions.
A focus on heavy industry and a diversion away of resources away from agriculture, and it resulted in a famine that left the estimates still vary widely, somewhere between 15 and 45 million people dead. And as you say, the machinery of the planning continued, and it really started to change significantly in the late 1970s and then in the 1980s, where you had changes put in place through the 5-year plans that opened up the markets, that kind of paved the way, really, for China to enter the global trading system.
Kevin, obviously China it's a vast economy, it's a vast country, and it's you know, one in which the government is heavily involved, it has state capitalism. But why does it still need a 5-year plan? Like, it does sort of feel like an anachronism. You mentioned that before. I mean, given how vast the economy has grown and it has evolved, it has opened up, it has got foreign investment, it has got these big corporations. Why does Beijing still use a 5-year plan?
I think when people look at this, they describe a couple of functions really of this process. I mean, the first is goal setting and coordinative. And, that's not insignificant if you consider the scope of China's government and, the expectation that there will be an alignment of goals and metrics from the top leadership down to the county and township level officials. And there are millions of officials that need to have their KPIs and goals described. So that's one. I mean, second, I think it's important now in signaling. It signals a sense of control by the leadership, by Xi Jinping. And, the optics couldn't be, in some ways, a bigger contrast now. I mean, we've got China about to announce, it won't announce rather, but it will deliberate on its next 5-year plan in the coming days. And we're 3 weeks into a U.S. government shutdown.
Right. How involved does Xi Jinping get in this process?
What really happens in the plenum is closed doors. And I don't think we could say much to speculate, although, I think everyone's understanding is that the goals and targets as they emerge are his goals and targets. I mean, that gives them legitimacy and heft.
Yeah.
And so these goals will be his goals as this plan emerges, which we expect really not in its details until March when it's approved by China's parliament.
Yeah, the whole process around it is fascinating. Tell us about how it's done, right? Like, how is this plan actually, how does it all come together?
We have, there are 300 something Central Committee members who gather for this. There's been a lot of preliminary work already. It's also a document that is very complex. Some people have said it's not really a single plan, nor does it really span 5 years. The focus, of course, is on economic policy.
Right.
And, because of that record that goes back to the 1980s, what does it say about the central direction for the economy? And that's important for markets, too, not just because of economic growth targets, but because of the sectors that the government identifies as important. But beyond the economics of this plan, it has in past plans, sort of sprawled to encompass a whole range of other metrics for social development. The plans in the 2000s and 2010s had a focus on poverty alleviation, pulling people out of poverty. The plans can get very specific. I was just looking back at 2 5-year plans ago, and you have detailed to the percentage point increases in forest coverage, or a 4.5 percentage point increase in college enrollments over the course of 5 years.
That's some granular detail. Wow.
There's a lot.
And is it like, just in terms of the brass tacks, being kind of the nosy journalist that I am, like, is it the same hotel every 5 years? Is it the same venue? Is it the same people? Like, what's the kind of, and does Beijing feel different when it's happening and you've got all of these party members coming in?
Beijing doesn't feel different. And Beijing has, in the course of the last year, we've had big set piece events that clearly shut down the city, that feel different. The big military parade that we had in September, as an example, the meeting of the NPC, the parliament, every year does that. This doesn't really.
Right.
So it's very much happening in the background, although it won't be in the background. It'll be, the fact that the meeting is convening and, policies are under discussions very much front and center for state media.
Now, quiz time. And of course, it's related to 5-year plans and railways. How much did China's railway network expand during its most recent 5-year plan? Was it A, 6,000 kilometres, B, 16,000 kilometres, or C, 26,000 kilometres? We'll get you the answer at the end of the show. Up next, we discuss how China's 5-year plan remains a powerful tool of top-down control. Five-year plans, Kevin, they have evolved beyond just economic growth targets, haven't they? Like to things like the environment and social issues.
That was true. That was true in past plans,
Mm,
certainly. I think, the central tension that people are looking to see, how it's resolved this time is, the focus on uh, the development of what China sees as strategic
right.
industries. That includes clean energy, it
Hmm.
includes
Mm,
robotics and AI and quantum computing. And, to what extent this blueprint does more than just nod to the pressure on household spending and consumers, because that's really kind of the fundamental tension in the economy right now.
right. The domestic economy is really struggling. It's been strangled by this property crisis, and people are just not spending. Right.
Yeah. I mean, we saw that. We're speaking on the first day of the plenum. On the first day of the plenum, we got economic data
Mm,
that very clearly shows that, where economic growth is slower. It's still just under 5%. It's probably close enough to the around 5% growth target for the government to declare victory
mhm.
against the target for the year. But if you look at the property market, and we got a separate run of data today, home prices continue to fall. They may be down as much as 10% over the course of the whole year. Investment is down. That means construction jobs are down. Spending is suppressed. And other elements of the export reliance mean that there is a high degree of deflationary pressure and overcapacity.
Mm,
And that becomes a constraint on wages
mhm,
and spending. And I think, in the last few months, there have been signs that China's government takes that risk more seriously
mm.
now.
I mean, is this is sort of the situation that we're in now, is part of it, could you trace it back to previous 5-year plans, right? So, looking at
Hmm.
thinking about production targets, okay, thinking about from the top down, telling industries which areas they need to focus on. It sort of sets in train events like oversupply, right?
It does. It does. And, again, there's some academic research on this. What effect does the 5-year plan have? Well, if you think about from the macroeconomic goal
Mm,
to the microeconomic outcome,
yeah,
it has real effects.
right,
So, companies in the industries that the government identifies as crucial get more funding. And the research also shows they tend to have more non-performing loans.
right.
They tend to invest more heavily. And that's a pattern that you see, playing out in a number of industries, including the EV industry,
Mm,
that have emerged kind of as a point of concern because of what in China is being called involution.
you're right. Can you explain that
Uh,
to the viewers?
yeah, it's a term that that everyone here knows, and that is, I think, obscure to most of the rest of the world.
Truly is. I had to look it up. I had to go online and see what the definition of involution was. I had never heard of it before.
I think the origin is from an anthropologist who was studying agriculture in Java in the 1960s,
Right.
and was looking at this set of conditions that meant that output per acre
Mm,
was increasing, but output per working pair of hands was decreasing. So you had stagnating or falling wages and social problems,
right.
even though the production metric was going up.
Right.
And that's exactly the sort of the description of the problem, as many see it, in industries like EVs.
I suppose that's what I meant when I asked, why does China still have the 5-year plan? Because you could argue some of the problems it faces now are because of them. That, yes, it's good to let, person A and subsector B over here in this province know, what they should be aiming for, but it can lead to oversupply, overproduction, which is the situation it's in now. That's why I'm just wondering why, they think,
Yeah. Well, there's a lot written about this too,
mm,
and people have studied this. So, in recent years, China will argue that the planning model did some historically good things. Hundreds of millions of people lifted out of
right,
poverty, better environmental protections, $5 trillion, I think, in additional annual output since the last 5-year plan. But at the same time, when you incentivize millions of officials to chase a goal,
right.
you've created an incentive for performative management, which has also become a problem, or the literal-minded pursuit of a KPI to the point where other problems emerge. in a kind of whack-a-mole way. And I think that's a criticism, that's a widespread criticism of the response to what had been concerns about a property bubble.
And has ripple effects beyond China's borders as well, right? Because, those production targets, if they're met or if they're exceeded, results in products flooding into other markets, right? And
That's right.
has impacts, all around the world, right, in terms of oversupply.
This plenum, the outline of this 5-year plan, which is taking shape behind closed doors, comes clearly at a time when we have front page trade tensions between the United States and China. And China's exporters, to a degree that I think has surprised some observers, they have managed to find other markets in the course of this year. U.S. exports are way down, but proportionally, from a smaller base, exports to Southeast Asia and to the EU and to Africa are way up. So there is a kind of resiliency there. And then what follows from that is if you have overcapacity and the threat to domestic industries, and you see this in Europe, then maybe you've just moved the problem.
If you're interested in hearing more financial analysis and commentary, check out Reuters Open Interest. It's a hub for analysis and commentary on the Reuters app and Reuters.com. Stay tuned. In the next section, we discuss how China's 5-year plan unfolds against a tense global backdrop. Talk to us about the backdrop to all of this in terms of where China is at right now, in terms of the external environment. It's tricky, isn't it? I mean, in terms of there's a high stakes backdrop.
Yeah, we have these sort of two big events kind of on parallel tracks. You have the 5-year plan, which is taking shape. Again, we don't want to misdirect and suggest we'll have details. In all probability, we will not.
Which is fascinating, right? So you've got hundreds of delegates gathered in this hotel in is it downtown Beijing? Yeah.
To the extent I guess we have.
And when do you actually get the detail, or does it emerge at all?
We don't really get the details until it'll be months. It'll be until March, when essentially then you get what is a pro forma parliamentary approval of the planning document.
Wow.
So that's when we'll get the headline numbers like the GDP growth target and other things. So there's this big choreographed event on one track, and then on the other hand, we have the U.S. and China in the last yards of very high stakes trade negotiations that will determine whether this trade truce is extended beyond November, whether they can do some sort of grand deal, extend the status quo, or as Trump has threatened, sort of blow it up with a new round of tariffs.
In terms of the signaling, though, right? Because you mentioned one of the big aspects of this, one of the whole raison d'etre is to send the signal about what the priorities are. But how does that work then if you don't really get the download, as it were, until March? You don't really get the kind of. It seems like it's sort of a funny way to send the message if the message is kept under wraps for many months.
Well, I think it just happens in a different kind of time horizon, and it is after all a 5-year plan.
Right, there's time. There's time.
And I think part of it is, as I've said, this is it's a 10 million person organization, and so that ship doesn't turn with an email. But one important kind of thread of connection between what's happening at the plenum and the trade talks, is with the focus on strategic industries.
Right.
It's been a policy priority of Xi Jinping. It has also been the highest leverage that China has had in these trade talks when they began to throttle back and license rare earth exports, which are needed, in all kinds of advanced manufacturing. That's when you saw the dynamic of these talks change, and then the further extra territorial licensing that China proposed in recent weeks prompted initially an even stronger pushback from the Trump administration. And so I think the consensus is very strongly that in terms of economic policy, this 5-year plan, when it comes out, will continue that focus on strategic industries. She has described that as central to a kind of new era of global power politics. It's been crucial to, in their view, whatever success they've had in these trade talks vis-a-vis the United States.
Yeah.
And so the question is just what room is left at the margin for other kinds of policies that look to boost consumption or increase pensions or look at social welfare.
Because it's kind of like there's a twin track, isn't there? There's how China is handling what's going on with the US, with other trading partners, and then how it's handling what's going on in its own domestic market. And investors and traders presumably are looking for signals for both, in terms of how they so I think there's been a criticism for a long time that China should do more to boost consumption, to encourage people to spend more, maybe by boosting social welfare, for instance. So is that something that, what are the key things that people are looking out for? What are the signals that they're hoping to glean in any which way they can?
So, I think there will be a lot of interest in how much they can move the dial on support for consumption. We talked about the property market. The property market is the major drag on growth, on domestic consumption. We've had 2 years of kind of incremental policies that really haven't changed that, the kind of the fundamental dynamics of that overbuilt market, but maybe there's more that comes there. I think there's an expectation that they will look at social welfare and maybe healthcare, especially for the lowest income rungs. And probably anything beyond that would be a surprise because, the expectation is still very strong that the core focus here will be what she has called high quality development, which means, focusing on the industries that are seen as crucial to the next stage of international competition and emerging markets. And all of these also, of course, have dual applications.
Right.
They can be a driver of growth and they can be an element of military hardware and national security.
Right. Was the last one called productive forces? Like, does each 5-year plan have a kind of a slogan or a catchphrase attached to it?
You want to buy the T-shirt?
Oh, go on.
No, you do have phrases and slogans that are sort of officially backed and kind of find an audience. And the new productive forces is one of those. What is a new productive force exactly? Because it's pretty much capital and labor and land, right? And the previous 5-year plans also, to be fair, had a focus on innovation, just as previous 5-year plans nodded to the importance of domestic consumption in the economy.
Did you know there's a newsletter to go along with this podcast? It's called Reuters Econ World, and it's out every Thursday. I've put a sign-up link in the description to today's show. You can also find it on the Reuters app. Just go to menu and scroll down for newsletters. Up next, we discuss how the 5-year plan doubles as a geopolitical signal. Is Beijing coming to this plan? Is Xi Jinping coming to this plan in kind of so do they feel like almost from a position of strength? Because we've seen in recent weeks, in terms of the back and forth, the tensions with the US, China has implemented these export controls and strategic minerals. It's sort of used its control of the supply chain. It's kind of to its advantage, right? So is it sort of feeling like, its supply chain is at the heart of this, right? It's control.
Yeah, well, it has done what the U.S. has long done to China. It's found a way to weaponize the industrial supply chain, and it's done that in the context of these trade talks. And I think the expectation, is strong that China wants a trade truce. It doesn't want this sort of hot trade war. But I think equally people expect that having established this system of supply chain controls, That's going to be an enduring feature of how it deals with the United States and the rest of the industrialized economy. It has shown in a limited way, the United States has had the dollar and financial sanctions. And under the Biden administration, there was this idea of, what do they call it, a small yard with a high fence, this area of high-end chips where, access could be restricted. Well, China has developed its answer to that in these rare earth controls.
We are expecting Xi and Trump to meet later this month in South Korea. And who knows what will be hashed out, or maybe tensions will ease and everything will move on. But do China watchers, do investors, do the US look though at the 5-year plan to sort of see really what the direction of travel is, right? In other words, you could have a truce agreed on the trade side, but deep within the 5-year plan, there could be emphasis on things like AI, humanoid robots, strategic minerals that would suggest the direction of travel, in terms of, so there's the internal messaging, I suppose, within China, but there's also the external messaging with these 5-year plans.
Right. Well, I think that's right. I don't think some kind of more enduring deal or trade truce between the United States and China, I'm sure would be welcomed by businesses, by financial markets. And there are indications that at some level China believes that's in its interests too. But I think you're right. What the 5-year plan is expected to show is that this focus on strategic industries as a national priority it's not going to go away. And that takes us into the next decade, really. And so that will be an enduring feature of China's economic model where capital gets directed.
And this is an opportunity, isn't it, as well, kind of in terms of Beijing watchers to see who's in and who's out politically?
Well, one area that will be scrutinized this time is military leadership. Representation at the highest political level. China announced on Friday that 2 top military officials had been expelled from the party. That had been expected because both of them had disappeared from view, and that there were reports that they were the targets of investigations. Friday's announcement confirmed that. But coming as it did, on the cusp of the plenum, that has given rise to an expectation that we could see appointments to the Central Military Commission. And because of President Xi's anti-corruption campaign and the way that it has ensnared top military leaders, the Central Military Commission has been kind of only full to half of its 6-member capacity. So what happens there and who is appointed, if in fact we get an appointment announced, will be watched very closely.
In terms of the messaging here, which is kind of crucial to all of this, is what's not said as important as what is being said? The de-emphasis, I suppose.
That's a good question. I think if you look 5-year plan to 5-year plan, areas to look at with kind of negative space in mind might be environmental protections, might equally be areas of poverty alleviation. China's really, declared victory there on the basis of the gains for millions of people and that had been in rural poverty.
But say for something like a sector like EVs, which has done, arguably is too successful, right? They're producing so many vehicles. Like maybe that would be something that wouldn't be emphasized going forward just because, or would it not be just not as prescriptive as that?
Don't hold me to a prediction, but...
Go on, get the crystal ball out, Kevin. Go on. Where am I going to be in 5 years? That's a whole other podcast.
Yeah. I think there might be some indirect commentary on a sector like that would also have bearing. So, as I've said, in recent months, China's government has expressed some concern about excess competition.
Involution.
Involution. And so if we see a sort of formalized discussion about the risks of excess competition and what it means for profitability and ultimately, sort of the stability of employment and incomes, that would be interesting. And it would obviously have implications for the auto industry, for EVs, for other sectors as well. And both in EVs and in solar, there are some signs that the government's stepping in to try to address what outside commentators have called the overcapacity trap.
What about in the housing sector? there have been some sort of measures around the edges, but is there anything expected on that in terms of, helping that market to recover?
Some have suggested maybe the most bang for the policy buck is in the larger cities. There is a huge oversupply problem nationally, but it's worse in the smaller cities that really had housing stock that grew faster than their populations now will. But for larger cities, in a targeted way, I think there would be interest to see what happens there.
Kevin, in terms of the targets that are set, are they set low so that they'll be met?
This year, for example, the GDP target has sort of a built-in fudge factor. It is around 5%. I think the economic consensus is growth will end up around, in fact, 4.8%. So, that's close enough, everyone believes, for the government to say, yes, target achieved.
And in years gone by, the economic growth target, I felt, was often surpassed, wasn't it?
That was true for a number of, for growth targets in past years, but also for air quality improvements, and true also of China's CO2 commitments under international treaties. There is the whole system incentivizes, a massive bureaucracy to hit a number, and everybody wants to perform. Everybody wants to be a star at the end of the year. And in elements of these plans over the years, that's certainly been a dynamic at play.
Kevin, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
A big thank you to Kevin for his time and insights. You can catch all our great coverage out of China on Reuters.com and the Reuters app. Now for that quiz. I asked you approximately how many kilometres of railway was built in China during its most recent 5-year plan. Was it A, 6,000 kilometres, B, 16,000 kilometres, or C, 26,000 kilometres? And the correct answer is B, 16,000 kilometres. This is Reuters Econ World. Every week we go deep on the economic principles and ideas driving the biggest news around the world. If you want to tell us what you thought of this week's show, please drop us a line in the comment section of your favourite podcast platform. You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn. Sound design, music composition and engineering on this episode was by Josh Summer. Our podcast team includes Kim Bennell, Tara Oakes, Gail Issa, Christopher Wall-Jasper, Jonah Green, David Spencer, Abisoye Adelusi, Evan Jacobi, Alex Summer, Sean Gaskell, Sebastian Summer and Sharon Reich-Garson. Our executive producer is Lila de Kretzer. Remember, for all your daily news, check out our show Reuters World News. You can catch it on the Reuters app or wherever you get your podcasts.